Welcome back to Animal Crossing New Horizons. I'm dear darling. I shall see what's going on our lovely island of Fawnhallow lovely island of Fawnhallow today. I was like, wait, is that the intro? Is that how I usually speak? And the answer is yes. As you can tell by today's title, we'll be talking about Talos Principle 2 today. Because the video actually went up today of the finale, of it being rounded up, everything coming together. So if you're new here, this is a daily vlog I have where I talk about random things. This is not me recreating Talos Principle. This is not very thought through discussion. These are just things that sort of come off the top of my head and my own personal, very biased thoughts and feelings about it. So, hello everyone, right now in Fawnhallow at 6:12 PM on Tuesday, January 28th, 2025. Also, happy Lunar New Year's Eve to those of you who celebrate. But yes, so Talos Principle 2, on the whole, I would say I liked it, I enjoyed it. And probably, I would say on the whole, I enjoyed it more than Talos Principle 1. Now, there's a little bit of an asterisk because I don't think I enjoyed all of it more than Talos Principle 1. I think there's parts I enjoyed more and parts I enjoyed less. And that's it's a little bit ambiguous, but I think actually I was going to say if you enjoy Talos Principle 1 you'll probably enjoy Talos Principle 2, but now I actually think about that, I'm not actually entirely sure if that's true because it depends on what you enjoyed in Talos Principle 1, I think. But I think for most people, if you enjoy Talos Principle 1, you'll probably enjoy Talos Principle 2. The core components, the core gameplay part is the same, and I'll warn you before I get into any spoilers. But if you don't know, Talos Principles both 1 and 2 are basically puzzle games, primarily, mechanically, they are puzzle games with small bits of exploration tacked on, and interestingly, a very unique perspective with what it comes to the story. Puzzle games generally have story, but generally tend to be quite light in story a lot of the time. It is not a key component, but I would say the story is actually, not the story itself, but the way story is presented in this game is a core component of a Talos Principle because it goes down a very philosophical route. In the first game, I guess mild spoilers ahead, in the first game, the first Talos Principle, you are basically speaking with an artificial intelligence sort of interface. And there's a lot of exploration, to be fair, all optional, I believe, where you can speak with them and then have these philosophical debates and discussions to do with, like, it's a bit vague in my head, I can't quite recall exact discussions, but you know, what is like goodness and badness, right? Or something like that. But that's some of the discussions which come to mind, is like, how can you like truly be the judge of what is good and what is bad, and then like the hypocritical and the hypocrisies you have laid within. Talos Principle 2 is pretty similar as well in that regard. It's a puzzle game at its core mechanical concept. It's a puzzle game, you have levels, you do the puzzles. There's a bit of exploration in it. I will say if you like the exploration more in Talos Principle 1, specifically for the exploration, you'll probably not like it as much in Talos Principle 2. It's not as good. It's better for me, personally, because I don't care. I didn't like the exploration in Talos Principle 1 that much, and I liked it here in Talos Principle 2 because it felt a bit more controlled, is what I would say. But if you're someone who likes wandering into every nook and cranny of a map just to see like random Easter eggs, just to see what's there, you probably won't like number 2 as much as number 1, is my guess. But it still has that component, and it still has the core component of its story being told via sort of discussing philosophical concepts. Although here in Talos Principle 2 it's a bit more concrete. Like, rather than you just being a person and you seeing like this diegetic lore, I suppose, from all the notes left behind by other previous pilgrimers, you have like a society now, and you have a team which all have different opinions, different thoughts and discussions that you can have there within about them, and it is a different focus. Like, Talos Principle 1 is very much on the self and the individual, I suppose, and the opinions you come to, you know, what makes you a good individual or a bad individual, what makes you righteous, what makes you virtuous, what makes you choose the decisions that you choose to do, essentially. That's what I remember from Talos Principle 1. Well, Talos Principle 2 sort of expands that scope in a different way, where instead of, you know, rehashing the same philosophical questions, because that would be really quite boring, in my opinion, it gets a new perspective. It's like, okay, it's no longer about the individual, but it's about your place within a society. How do you do what's best for a society? How do you know what is best for society, or decide there within? What choices? How do you come to conclusions when there are dissenting opinions and, you know, reasons, valid reasons on both sides, because things are not always so black and white, essentially. That's quite a lot of what the exploration is, and it's kind of like why you have a different team now. You have a whole team now, because you can't really represent a load of different opinions with just one individual, right? You kind of need a team who all have different perspectives, and it's all about sort of a progression of humanity, and because it's set in the features, I suppose, learning from the current humanities, like us, is mistakes, and seeing how they can do the best not to repeat them. And some people are just like, yes, by sort of progressing with science and investigation and research, we can avoid them. And then other people are like, that's a double-edged sword. If you do so, then that gives the power and tools to, again, repeat the same mistakes that they've been befallen to before. Things like that. So that's basically what Talos Principle is in a nutshell. And I think, like, by that point you'll know if it's your sort of game or not. If you like puzzles, then it probably is your sort of game. You can play it just with a puzzle element. You don't have to do the philosophical story discussion elements as well. I would say it is a key component of a game though, so I would say you are missing out, but that's kind of up to you whether you like that or not. Yeah, so Talos Principle 2, because I feel like most of a comparison will be against Talos Principle 1. I think it's a game which stands up on its own. You don't really need to play the first one, in my opinion, to get much more out of the second one, except for more a similar thing. Because out of the core components of it is the mechanics of Talos Principle 2, and the puzzles in are great. They are so smoothly streamlined. There was a slight criticism I had of Talos Principle 1 is that I love the puzzles. I absolutely adore the puzzles, but some of them very much got like very weirdly not weirdly complicated in the sense that it's like this is challengingly difficult, but it felt, what's a word? Like, it felt cumbersome, I suppose, is probably the better way to put it. Talos Principle 2 sort of, you know, in my opinion, does it a little bit better, because all of the levels are very clearly divided into these worlds, and each of these worlds has one central mechanic it focuses on. Like, it introduces a new component, and then it basically gives you like 8, technically 11 levels where it says, okay, we're going to push this mechanic and have a very refined 8 base levels, 2 sort of like slightly out there levels, and 1 challenge level to its kind of like limit, quote quote, to try and see what interesting sort of mechanics and discoveries we can have within. And to me, I think Talos Principle 2 was easier, probably because I had a lot of experience from Talos Principle 1, but also because I think there's probably something very subtle within the game design of it, which allows you that sort of the through line of discovery better. Because there's a very subtle thing where you, through game design elements, through the way that things are placed, you sort of try and communicate, yes, this is kind of what I want you to do, or this is the way I kind of want you to think, which is very subtle in puzzle games, because you obviously don't want the player to think that, because you want the player to think, wow, I'm so smart, I can't believe I got that on my own, when really there's like, oh, there's actually, because of the way that this game design level was set up, so immediately you saw this puzzle piece here, and then you saw that thing over there. Not that you got the solution immediately, but you understood that these are the key components that you need to interact with. Now, it has been a while since I played Talos Principle 1, so maybe that isn't as true as I think it is, but I do feel like Talos Principle 2 was a very sort of like tightly knit bundle of puzzles. Like, it felt like all of the puzzles flowed very nicely together. The only exception being is that while mechanically they flowed together, these subworlds are very, very big in Talos Principle 2, to the point I would say they're probably too big for the little amount of exploration you have in Talos Principle 2. I don't know if maybe I just missed out on tons and tons and tons of secrets, which is very possible, but it does take a while for you to walk from each level to level, which is a little bit strange, I think, because there's not Talos Principle 1. Now I'm going to say all bets are off. Spoilers galore if you haven't played them. But my biggest criticism of Talos Principle 1 were the star puzzles, where I was just like, these are so obscure, like, they're not better thought as puzzles, because they're not really puzzles, they're more like exploration rewards, if anything. Because some of the solutions to try and get the stars in Talos Principle 1, which are essentially optional challenges, so they don't matter, but if you want like the best ending, you do have to get them, I think, are so unbelievably like obscure. Like, it's so difficult. Like, so many of them require on you basically not breaking the level, but using this like very weird like niche little thing to like hop up on the wall, to bring the cube up, to walk along the edge of it, to hop down, to basically bring like components out of the level, then use it in this other very random place across the levels, and then set up something in a different level to like shine a laser, and then that you get the star from that. It's very convoluted, I would say, and I had to basically get most of the stars by using a star, like a hint guide, because it was so obtuse trying to get most of them. Talos Principle 2 refines it, in my opinion, by basically setting down the precedent by being like, okay, you know, obviously you go into Talos Principle 2, most people played number 1, they're going to be expecting secret stars somehow or another. So they're just like, okay, we're not going to try and pretend there aren't secret stars for you to get. We're going to give you the premises. You have 3 different types of challenges: Prometheus challenge, a Pandora challenge, and a Sphinx challenge. And each of them will reward you with a star. You have to figure out how to get that star. And they do it very nicely because they split it into the 3 different subsections. Where Prometheus kind of rewards your sort of exploration of a level. It rewards you going out and looking all around these big sort of hub worlds to try and find the Prometheus's fire, and then it sort of takes you on this really fun sort of exploration journey once you found it, like all the way back. Like it's sort of like the closest you can get to a parkour-esque sort of challenge. And then Pandora's puzzles sort of reward the out-of-the-box thinking, the type similar to Talos Principle 1, where it's like, I need to break the level somehow, I need to think outside the box, I need to look at like a very sort of meta scale of a level, as the hub world as its whole, as a whole, it's a level. Like I need to shine a laser out from one level to a different one, I need to set something up on this one so it can connect via that level. And to me, the Pandora levels all felt a lot more clearer, because it felt a lot less ambiguous, because you can find things which would hint towards like, oh, these are the appropriate things to work with. Because that's the thing I hated with Talos Principle 1. Hated is strong. I didn't like with Talos Principle 1 was like, even if you know what you kind of have to do for a star, like, oh, I need to shine a laser on this obelisk, it's like, well, which levels do I need to interact with to do it? I don't know, because it's not immediately clear to me which level I can break and bring a connector out of it, or which one might have a sight on it or something immediately. It's like, if anything, it's too open-ended, and it's a sort of thing where I personally was like, I looked at it and was like, I'm not sure I can really be bothered to try and figure out which one of these levels and iterate and experiment over and over again to try and figure out what it is. I much prefer the case where it's like, okay, you know, it's like, there is a puzzle here, these are the things which are involved with it, figure it out. Rather than, there is a puzzle here, figure it out. I guess because it gives more of a direction to it, it feels more like I'm solving a puzzle rather than experimenting, which may be something which you don't like. Which is why I say that some Talos Principle 2 does things a bit differently. If you like that experimental nature of Talos Principle 1, of exploring, getting the stars, like trying things over and over again, ridiculous things, trying these weird parkour jumps, you will like Talos Principle 1 more, and you'll probably not like Talos Principle 2 because it does not allow you that creativity and freedom. But if you like Talos Principle 1 for the puzzle solving aspect of those stars, then you'll probably like Talos Principle 2 more because it gives you more direction. It says like, okay, these are the red herrings, this is what you need to focus on, you can figure it out from here. It still gives you like an open-ended sort of thing, but it gives you more of a thing where you're not like randomly trying around with one level, experimenting for ages and being like, oh, it turns out this level's not even needed. So that's the Pandora statues. And then the Sphinx statues are kind of a much more sort of diegetic, like world-based puzzle things where you sort of have to explore a little bit, you have to experiment, and you have to find like unearthing an Easter egg, which is also quite similar to Talos Principle 1, which I think is a very, very clever way to basically sort of channel the different types of star puzzles you got in Talos Principle 1 into, you know, like 3 separate categories, so you always know what you're signing up for if you want to do them. Because I could very easily just be like, oh, I don't really want to do the Sphinx puzzles, I don't like trying to do that, I'm going to focus only on the Pandora and Prometheus statues, or something like that. That I thought was very nice. And that's what I mean by Talos Principle 2 is structured. It has a lot more structure in the game, which makes it, I think, better, like easier to sort of like pass and work your way through. But that's also because it appeals to my taste more, because I don't care that much for exploration in a game. I care for experimentation, I suppose, within like a confined system, but I don't like it when it's like, you know, if you're like in a level, experiment like crazy. Contained system, yes. Here's the entire world, experiment like crazy. I'm like, that's too many things, I can't be bothered to do that. That's my own personal tastes, you might not agree, that's totally fine. So that's what I'd say, like that's like, I think one of the big differences between 1 and 2. To touch upon the puzzles and levels themselves, I think they've brought in a lot of interesting mechanics, and a lot of them are improvements, I would say. Like, the clone mechanic is much, much better than the time record mechanic in Talos Principle 1, because it's so less finicky, is why. I think some of them were genuinely really cool. Like, I thought the teleporter was a really, like, is like, when I saw it, I was like, that's like a, of course, why wouldn't that be, why wouldn't that be like a puzzle element? And then what else was a good one? I think the one which stored the accumulator, I was like, yes, this opens up a lot of interesting possibilities, I think, for the levels. I would say in the whole, I feel like the Talos Principle 2 levels were easier than Talos Principle 1, but that might be because they were more focused, because it was like, here's one mechanic, we're pushing this mechanic, you know that this is going to be a crux of a level somehow, figure it out. Or it might have just been because I've done so much of Talos Principle 1 that I came into Talos Principle 2 basically being like an expert already, while Talos Principle 1 I had to learn the sort of systems. That is hard to say, I think. They're still challenging games in my own right, don't get me wrong. There were like at least 2 puzzles, I think, which I had to spend an entire episode in Talos of recording to solve it. But very few levels, I think, in Talos Principle 2 ever made me go, that's ridiculous, or that's cheap, or something. Some I would say are frustrating, in the sense, minimal, to be fair, but some of them where it's like you had to wait for something or like time something is like, that's a little bit annoying, but other than that I think it's pretty cool. The final world in Talos Principle 2 will be utopia over dystopia. I think is a very cool concept. Story wise, philosophy wise, 1 and 2 I think they're just different. I like them both for separate reasons. I like Milton as a character a lot in Talos Principle 1 because I think he was stern but fair, I suppose, where, you know, I think a part that really enamored me to him is when he had that situation where he had the situation where he basically said, you know, we had these discussions over and over again where he sort of challenged my philosophies, being like, what would you think of this situation, what do you think of this situation, and then questioned me on it, and then he brought it all like full circle to be like, hey, you know, like, what do you think of this situation? And then he called me out on it and was like, hey, but you answered differently here. Do you not see that there's an inherent contradiction here? And that, you know, made me stop and think. But to be fair, Talos Principle 2 also made me stop and reflect. It was that's like direct call-outs where it was like, you, player, what do you think about this? It was more like it presented a story or a perception and of like someone else's opinion. And I sat there and it made me think, being like, what do I think of this? Do I agree with this? Do I not agree with this? There is a lot of reading and there's a lot of listening, I think, in Talos Principle 2 because there's a lot more non-optional dialogue content, I suppose. While you can skip all the terminals, you can't skip the cutscenes, right? So I understand if that's not your thing, if you didn't really like that in Talos Principle 1, you're going to hate it in Talos Principle 2 because now it's forced, essentially. Or Talos Principle 1 is basically like, go there, do the puzzle, you can leave, you don't have to talk to Milton. But I think it gives a nice new flavour to Talos Principle 2. I think the writing's pretty decent. I wouldn't say like, oh, it's super memorable. It's not going to go down in history as the best writing ever, I think. Like the character writing, that is. But the characters are memorable enough that I'm like, yes, you know, I like them. Like, I don't hate them, and I can see the different opinions that come to light. And I think it's fun to see it as a sort of a microcosm of society, this mini-society reflecting a larger society, all coming together and exploring opinions and different thoughts that way. I think that's genuinely very cool. So yeah. I'm not sure what else to say about that. I think that the types of topics both of them cover are like, I don't think there's a comparable. They're like both pretty good. Which you are more enamored with kind of depends on you as a person, I suppose. So that's like kind of up in the air. But on the whole, I think like Talos Principle 2 is like a tighter game than Talos Principle 1. Like it feels like a worthy successor in my mind. It iterates upon it by giving you more things that you do like. It refines some of the processes and it changes them up enough to be like, yes, this has its own distinct flavor, but not necessarily identity, if that makes sense. Like, it's still Talos Principle at its core, at its heart, but it still feels like a different take. Not different take, but different iteration, I suppose, of Talos Principle, if that makes sense. Yeah, and it was nice to see the sort of conclusion of the story in the end, to see it more interwoven within. I don't know how on earth they would do a Talos Principle 3, if there is a Talos Principle 3, but I love the puzzles in Talos Principle, which are, to me, still the lifeblood of the game. Puzzles first, philosophy second. Still a high second, mind you, but it's still, you know, I'm there for the puzzles first and foremost. So yeah, I think that's basically my thoughts on Talos Principle 2. I thoroughly enjoyed it. You may also thoroughly enjoy it, you may also not enjoy it, depending, I suppose, on you and your situation and what you prefer, but on the whole, I think it's pretty cool. So, on that note, I'm going to round this episode off here. So if you haven't watching, thank you very much. It's been Animal Crossing New Horizons. I've been Dear Darling. Likes, comments, subscription, shares, greatly appreciated. Socials, Discord down below. Hope you see each other again, but for now, it's our farewell. So until next time, bye-bye for now.